microphone? Hi.
On is key. Ooh, yeah. I'm gonna cry because I cry every time I talk about Cheryl. But I do want to say thank you so profoundly to the museum, because I called the museum and said, hey, I have this book coming out. Do you want? Yes, we want to do a party. We want to have a horse. We want to have bunny rabbits, and we're gonna beam in the Compton Cowboys who are on this live stream. The Ebony Horsewomen are also watching. So Black equestrians are watching from all over the country. And here's where I'm gonna cry. It starts early, which is we wrote this book to put Cheryl back in history where she belongs. And here we are, standing on the day of her first ever win on her horse, Gentilera, in the Hall of Fame. Does that feel amazing? And without further ado, we'll kick it off to our Master of Ceremonies here.
Matt, are you ready?
We're ready.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Teresa Gennaro. I'm a freelance turf writer and a Saratoga native, and an avid student of racing history, particularly the history of marginalized people whose names and voices we don't get to hear very often. So I couldn't be more pleased to be a part of this morning's event. As Sarah said, in addition to the Racing Museum, this event is co-hosted or joined by the Kentucky Equine Education Project, the Ed Brown Society, the Compton Cowboys, Ebony Horsewomen, and Murneen Equestrian. And they will be joining us via live stream. Folks at home, there'll be an opportunity at the end for questions, both from the audience and via the chat on the museum's YouTube channel. I'd like to introduce the folks who we are so lucky to have with us today. Raymond White Jr. hails from Ohio, and when we were talking last week, he described his family, which goes back generations in racing, as one of the few to have survived the gentrification of the sport. His father was a very well-known trainer, started 2 horses in the Kentucky Derby, one in the 30s and one in the 40s. He himself has held almost every role you can in horse racing. He's been a jockey's agent. He has been an exercise rider. He has been an assistant trainer. He has been a groom. He's been a horse owner. One thing he hasn't been is a jockey. He left that to his sister. Currently, Raymond serves as the national director of the advertising firm Cabango Media, founded by his son, Raymond White III. And the company takes its name from the White family's best horse named Cabango. Raymond, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Sarah has been a writer at the New York Times for more than a decade. In 2016, she was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for her series Unvarnished, which is how I first learned about her. This series documented in excruciating detail the deplorable conditions in New York City's manicure and pedicure industry. And if that sounds trivial, it's anything but, and it literally changed my manicure life. She attended Columbia University and the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. And other stories with which you may be familiar, she covered the escape of inmates at the Clinton Correctional Facility, which locals may remember happened, I think, on Travers Day a few years ago, and that prevented Governor Cuomo from coming and attending the Travers that day because there were inmates on the loose in upstate New York. She was on the front lines in COVID reporting, traveling to New Rochelle, New York, where the first COVID cases were found in the state, and being there literally on the ground to see what was happening in that community. And her official bio on the New York Times website concludes with the line, "She loves horses." Thank you, Sarah, so much for being here. And I will turn it over to the two of you. We will first hear them read from excerpts from the book. We will be joined by an editor of the book. After the reading, we'll take questions from here and conclude. Thanks.
So Aubriana Johnson, the founder of Black in the Saddle, was an editor for authenticity on the book, which was really important to our process. Raymond is a Black man and I'm a white woman, but Cheryl was a Black woman, and we felt it really needed to make sure that we got her voice right. And so it was really important work that Aubriana did with us. So thank you so much. And we're gonna read a little passage. It's important to note that the book is true to Cheryl's life completely. Every fact is accurate, but it's also a work of fiction. And we imagined conversations and reimagined Cheryl's journey to help tell the story, not just of Cheryl, but of the Black contribution to thoroughbred racing, which was tremendous, especially enslaved Black labor. And so this is a conversation that we imagine between little Drew, or as Cheryl liked to call you, Drool, and Dad. So why don't we start on page 60 and 160, excuse me, yeah. So the real truth is, your dad didn't want Cheryl to be his jockey.
No, she did not. He wanted me to be the jockey. So
and what do you say about that?
when I was the right size, I was too young. By the time I became the right age, I was too big.
Mhm.
So I was destined to just be an exercise rider and gallop horses.
So Raymond was the jockey he wanted, but Cheryl was the jockey he got.
That is exactly.
And his father was a traditionalist, and he didn't want a girl to ride his horses. But he came around, and he ended up putting many women jockeys.
Yes, absolutely.
And so this reimagines that conversation about shifting Raymond Sr.'s mind. On the corkboard for exercise riders, the list was already up. Drew's name was on it. And so was the name of the horse he was to ride, his father's best horse, Drew and Jetalera. Drew looked at the strong chestnut gelding in his stall. The horse's chocolate eyes stared back at him and blinked slowly. But in them, Drew did not see himself. He saw his sister. He ran down the barn aisle straight to the feed room with his dog Sheba hot at his heels. The barn was dark, and the boy stood silhouetted in the doorway. His father was elbow deep in dry oats stirring the feed. Drew didn't say, "Good morning." He said two other words.
Oliver Lewis.
His dad looked up from his work, his eyebrows raised, his face puzzled.
Well, that's a new way to greet someone, kiddo,
Raymond said to his son with a chuckle. But Drew wasn't smiling. He was holding his fists in two small balls, rooting his toes to the earth. He was standing the way a young colt does when it meets the herd for the first time, trying so hard to be so very brave. He took a deep breath. Then he was very brave indeed. He told the great horseman, Raymond White, that he was wrong.
Dad, you told me the story of Oliver Lewis, the first person to ever win the Kentucky Derby. You told me all about all the prejudiced Black riders like him and Grandpa and you faced, and that we still face. Well, I'm standing there to tell you something too.
He took another big gulp of air. Take a big gulp of air. And uncurled one fist to graze his fingers lightly on his puppy's orange head to give him strength.
You, Dad, are being prejudiced against Cheryl.
Raymond stood up fully from his work at the grain bin. He dusted the oats off his hands and put his hands on his hips. He was of a mind to tell his son not to speak to him like that and to never throw such a hateful word around, particularly at his own father. But he had raised Drew to ask questions so that he might become a critical thinker like Raymond himself. He was impressed with his son's verve, and he decided to practice what he preached. So he responded simply,
please tell me what you mean.
Drew relaxed. Sheba banged her tail on the ground, sensing the tension slip from the air.
Well, Dad, when one group of people are not allowed to do something just because of who they are, that's prejudice. That same history you told me about black people like us in racing, well, that's kind of similar to how girls, women, have had it in racing too, isn't it? They weren't allowed to ride for so long for no reason other than who they were.
Raymond nodded slowly. The one light bulb in the tack room, dangling with cobwebs, was directly above his head, and his face brightened with illumination from inside. It was almost as if its light was coming from within him, expanding his mind and filling the room. All this time, Raymond had known Cheryl was truly great. He had been tough on her in the same way he was strong and disciplined with his racehorses, pushing them to their potential but never past it. He had kept her from riding his star horses, so she would understand that her wins were earned not by the thoroughbred she was riding, but by her. He'd put her on the slow horses so she'd learn how to make them fast, instead of coasting to glory on a proven winner. He hadn't thought that by making his daughter work harder for his dreams, his children would come to think that he didn't share them. Drew spoke into the silence.
I will not ride Gentilera. I do not deserve to. He's the best racehorse we have, Dad. He should be ridden by the best jockey. And the best jockey is Cheryl.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it does.
The book comes out on September 5th, so you all listening are the first people to ever hear it. So.
And take questions first from the folks here, and if you want to raise your hand, I'll be happy to bring the microphone to you.
This is for Raymond. I'm interested to know how you think your sister handled the kind of bias and the attitudes on the track as she came and began to ride. What did she talk about it? What did she do to kind of have some sense of peace with all of that going on around her?
I think that goes back to her, I've been asked a question about my sister, one word description of her, and it's fearless. And I think that she pushed all that aside. She didn't let anything get in the way, nothing. So I don't think that, she didn't talk about it a lot because she would make no excuses. She would make no excuses for anything. So it was, she worked hard, she played, she just went about her business. So I think, that just being fearless and just pushing for your dreams and your goals no matter what. I mean, it started with our father not wanting her to ride, but he put his biases aside to allow that to happen for her to reach her dreams. And then after that, she wasn't letting anything get in her way. So she kind of overcame that.
Can I answer a little bit too? As a researcher and sort of the historical record, when you read articles about Cheryl White, remember she did this when she was 17 years old, guys. She was a kid. There's a lot riding on her shoulders. And there's actually some news articles that say, first black female jockey rides under no banner, meaning she doesn't have a cause. She just wants to ride. But then when you look a little deeper into the articles, there's some moments when she says, why are you all calling me Jockey? It says jockey on my license. Why are you minimizing me because I'm a woman? And then she says in some other articles, I can't get good rides. It's very key that her start was on her father's horses because other people wouldn't give her a chance. And she says it's because I'm black and because I'm female, I believe. And then she stopped talking about it. And one Thanksgiving in 1971, in 1968, women had just sued for the right to ride. They didn't have the ability to ride before that, and they were a group of white women. And if you really were an athlete and you really wanted to ride, you probably couldn't wave a flag if you wanted to get those great mounts.
I just want to ask a question to Abriana. First of all, I'm sorry for not having introduced you at the top of the program. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about Back in the Saddle and what you were reading for when Sarah and Raymond asked you to look at the book.
Yeah, so Black in the Saddle is a podcast that talks about the impact and the influence of Black people on the horse industry. And so when Sarah asked me to really look at this from a lens, a identity as a Black woman, I was looking for what is it that goes through my mind in some of these tough conversations. And so there's a conversation in here with Cheryl and her friend Earlene about hair. And that's such a big part of a Black woman's identity. And so really, looking at the dialogue and saying, okay, this is usually how this conversation goes when we talk about having good hair and what that means and how that impacts our identity. So those were the things that I was looking for, those little nuances that come from an experience as a Black woman, but also as a biracial woman. How should that come out in the dialogues that are happening in this book?
I actually just had breakfast with Earlene earlier this week in Columbus, Ohio. So she is a real person. She's still with us.
Hi, thank you. This has been wonderful. I was a little confused about the time frame in which she was able to break through, because it seems to me that she was a pioneer, not just as a Black woman, but as a woman, which and I'm a little wondering, what was the time frame? I didn't quite get that.
So in 1968, a group of women led by Kathy Kusner, who a gentleman just came up to me and said she lives at the home where his father also lives, which is really cool. This legendary white female jockey got together with a group of women and sued the Maryland Racing Commission for the right to ride. Women were not allowed to ride at all. And then Cheryl did this amazing feat in 1971, so 3 years later. And so those group of women who sued were pioneers, but they were all white women. And Cheryl wasn't part of that conversation. And then you also have to remember, she's a teenager. And to talk about the context of the time that you asked about, that's the beginning of the women's movement, the Black Power movement. And in headlines, every time Cheryl raced, there were headlines that were like, oh, she lost. I guess that whole women's lib thing didn't work out, huh? So I guess they're not as good. And that was riding on the shoulders and in the saddle with this 17-year-old girl as she did this amazing feat.
Will Cheryl White be put in the Hall of Fame here? Because I saw there's no females at all.
They I believe they do have some female people, but the museum can answer, but they did a really incredible exhibit on female jockeys, and they included Cheryl in that. And there's also the Keeneland Racing Museum is extending their own exhibit on Black female jockeys and female jockeys. And really, to the museum's credit, is they have been working to correct the record. I'm gonna go a little into the history, can I? I'm a history nerd. Black people were thoroughbred racing. In its earliest days, you ran the horses you owned with the humans you owned on their backs. People went to West Africa to purchase other human beings, to kidnap them for their equestrian skill, because West Africa has a really incredible legacy of equestrian culture. And those were the people who became your trainers, as enslaved people. The first ever winner of the Kentucky Derby in this Hall of Fame, its first ever inductee, I just learned, Oliver Lewis, a Black man. And the trainer of that horse was a self-emancipated enslaved person. And I'll take you all on a visual journey to Churchill Downs, where there is a statue of Barbaro, the famous racehorse, right? We know Barbaro stretched out in a gallop with a rider in bronze on his back. And there's a statue of Aristides, who won the first ever Kentucky Derby. No rider on his back, as if that horse ran the Derby alone. That rider was a Black man. And so the Racing Museum has really been working hard to correct that legacy, and I'm impressed with the work they've done, and we're happy to help them in that work. Shout it out.
Hi, so thank you so much for doing this, because I think, sort of as a student of racing, but also as a student of history, I think we're sort of at a sweet spot right now. We were talking before, Geraldine Brooks just put out a book that sort of talks a lot.
She blurbed our book.
And she blurbed their book.
She's real cool.
But it's interesting now, how do we bring more attention, not only to the early days of horse racing history and what the color that looked, and the gap that happened, and where do we go from here? Could you talk about what do you think about that?
Ask Aubriana to answer this, because we talked about this yesterday. I think your story about starting the middle is really powerful.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I do with Black in the Saddle, you know, really talking to people who are Black equestrians right now with a whole range of interest in the industry, from a 17-year-old barrel racer to a 63-year-old mounted archer. And he is a bad man. He is so good. But one of the really important things about being able to tell this history is figuring out where you're starting. A lot of times when we talk about the exclusion of Black people in the industry, that's the middle of the story. Like Sarah said, we started that. We started in this, and we were so good at you know, between rodeos, racing, there's so many facets of the industry that we started in and excelled in. And in order for people to hear these stories and see themselves, you have to start with the truth, you know, and give them something to look forward to instead of starting with the trauma of being excluded. And so I think that is one of the ways for us to continue this conversation, is instead of starting in the middle where, you know, we felt like we didn't belong, start at the beginning where the creators were, where the people who were driving force in this industry, so people can see themselves in those stories, see themselves in stories like Cheryl's, and start the conversation where it truly begins.
But they've always been there.
Yeah, they've always been there.
Matt, do we have any questions from the live stream?
No.
Anybody else in here?
I have a question for Raymond. I'm a reporter, sorry. Raymond, tell me about your sister. How would she feel about this? Tell me what it was like. Tell me everything.
Oh, I don't know if you want to know everything.
Talk about.
She would, I think that she would be wondering why we're all making such a big deal of it. She went about her business. She didn't think of anything. She didn't think of herself as a big deal. She didn't brag about herself. She didn't talk about herself. There was a guy who worked next to her for 3 or 4 years in Youngstown at the racetrack there. He said he never knew. He knew she was a jockey, an old retired jockey, but he didn't know she was who she was. He didn't know she was the first Black female jockey. She never told him. She just never talked about herself. So she would probably be kind of overwhelmed by this. She would just be like, wow. And it's kind of ironic because when she worked at Thistledown, right before the incident with her, where she passed away, I told her, I said, you know, you're going to be contacted by the media. She says, why would the media contact me? Because you're going back and you're working at Thistledown, and you came full circle. This is where your career started, and now you're back here. That's a story, Cheryl. She's like, I ain't worried about it. Nobody's going to contact me. So she just didn't think of herself. Yeah, she didn't think of herself as a big deal. I mean, she just didn't. So, but she was fantastic.
Raymond, you always thought of her as a big deal. And, you know, in 1971, she was almost a household name. The stands were full. There were reporters everywhere. And you did this funny thing. You used to bring celebrities into the winner's circle for when you were 9 years old. Tell this quick story.
We were at Pitt Park at the Meadows of Pennsylvania. And we were there. And somehow or another, I found, it was 1972. I was 10. Somehow I found out that Dave Cash was in the grandstands. Dave Cash was the starting second baseman for the Pittsburgh Pirates, who were a big deal back then. They were a World Series team. And so somehow I found Dave Cash and went up to him and I was like, hey, my sister Cheryl White. And he knew who Cheryl White was because she was a household name. And I said to him, if she wins a race, do you want to come in the winner's circle? And he said, well, yeah. Well, as fate had it, she won a race. We found this picture like a few months ago, and I literally, if you'd asked me before we found it, I would have thought that there was one of our father's horses that won the race that I took this man into the winner's circle with. But I looked at the trainer and I was like, I have no idea who this is. And here I am standing right in front of the picture like it's my horse, and with my Cleveland Browns jacket on, and Dave Cash, as you're looking at the picture, he's the gentleman on the left. I just took this man and barged into some other person's win picture because my sister was their jockey, and you know, and I'm coming in here and bringing him in. So I probably prefaced it with, hey, this is Dave Cash. Can we come take a picture? So, yeah.
It really speaks that you have been your sister's champion all along, and that's what you're doing with this book.
And I want to add to that. The very first win picture of Cheryl White on Jet Alero. It's a black and white picture. It's the only win picture that she's not smiling at. She is shocked. So her look on her face is kind of slack jawed. She's just looking at the camera like. But I was 9 years old and I was at the other end of the grandstands and outside playing as 9-year-olds would do. And when the horses were coming around the head of the stretch, I realized Cheryl was going to win her first race. I took off running as fast as I could to get to the winner's circle. Well, the photographer did not let me set. So I'm in this win picture like this. I'm looking up at my sister. I'm in mid-run, but I'm looking up at my sister while my sister's looking slack-jawed at the camera, not believing she won a race. But it's now come to be almost iconic to me when I look at that picture because you can see the admiration that a 10-year-old had for his sister, famous sister, winning her first race. And that picture, the old saying, a picture tells 1,000 words. Well, it's worth 1,000 words. That's it. So.
Yeah, great.
We have time for maybe one more question, if anybody here would like to ask it.
How about a kiddo? I mean, we need a kid question. It's a kid's book. We wrote it for you guys. I'll put you on spot. No, they're brave. They're brave. No, not a one?
I'm going to ask a very non-kid question
Oh,
then. I'm going to ask the writer question, which is, can you briefly tell us about how the process of collaborating among the three of you went? Were you working off the same document? Were you telling stories to each other? Were you Google docking lots of comments? How did it go?
Well, if you couldn't tell, Raymond is a storyteller. He loves a story. I don't think you notice if your audience keels over during the story, but no, I wouldn't know. Loves a story, but which is an amazing resource for a journalist, right? You love a storyteller, tells great stories. So we really just sat with storytelling sessions. And that's how I got to know Raymond's family. I never got to know Cheryl White, but I got to know his incredible mother, Doris Jean Gorski, who was really kind of ahead of her time.
She was.
In her thinking. His father, who was this absolute legend, you know, he ran horses in the Derby when in 1932, at a time when he wouldn't have been allowed to sit in the grandstand to watch his own horses run because he was a black man. And, you know, they were an interracial couple, married at a time when the country was mostly segregated. Yep. You know, so Raymond's great storytelling and my tip-tapping it all down. And then Brianna joined us in the end to make sure that we got it right, read it to make sure it felt authentic, and then we did the Google Docs and the back and forth. And I will just close us out with one more thing, if you don't mind. Raymond will be back in the winner's circle today because the NYRA is running a race in Cheryl's honor. Thanks to the museum for making that happen, and Raymond will be presenting the trophy to the winner. It will be at 3:26 p.m. Race 6.
What's the worst thing?
Oh, we don't know the winner yet. We'll figure it out. You want to go into business together? Let's do it.
If we knew that, we'd all leave here well rich today.
Thank you all so much for coming to this, what I think is a really momentous event. And I had the good fortune to get a copy of the book a couple of weeks ago. I devoured it in one sitting. Buy it for every horse-loving girl and boy in your life. It's really just fantastic. Also, again, would like to thank the folks who are watching from home or on a live stream, the Kentucky Equine Education Project, the Ed Brown Society, Compton Cowboys, Ebony Horsewomen, and Marine Equestrians, and of course, the National Museum of Racing, and Brianna, Sarah, and Raymond. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, dear.